Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:08 p.m. in a very dark, grim, gloomy, dismal Central European city of Budapest, as is always the case. Um, Days are still horrifically short, and this much promised spring still seems an awfully long way away. But on the bright note, thank you everybody who has joined me for the Tuesday live stream. I really appreciate everyone who's joined me because there's a lot going on. I mean, particularly in the United States. So today we've had Trump nominees Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Jr. Being voted out of the committee, which is certainly an accomplishment because it was clearly touch and go. Well, whether they'll make it in the full Senate vote, that's still up in the air. But this was definitely a victory for Trump, and in a few hours' time, we will have Bibi Netanyahu making a visit to the Trump White House, being the first visitor to be welcomed by President Trump since taking the oath of office. Now, I think I've had some disagreements with the View. Somebody says, "Good to see you, George." McNear 8R. Nicknear. Oh, anyway, I'm mispronouncing it. So thank you very much. And Gary Hiari. So thank you so much. The idea which is being put about on alt media that Bibi is coming to Washington in order to get the green light from Trump to essentially to bring the ceasefire to an end, not go through with phase two, which is supposed to be starting now, the phase two, which is negotiations about Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, that essentially Trump is going to say, yeah, okay, we don't have to go through phase two. And ultimately, Netanyahu, and that means all his horrific colleagues, the Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, all of them will be able to enact their long dreamed of agenda of driving out the Palestinians from Gaza and, of course, ultimately the West Bank. And that's the real purpose of this visit. Now, I think, as I said before, I don't think this is going to happen because ethnic cleansing campaign of this magnitude, when you're talking about driving out millions of people from Gaza, millions of people from the West Bank, requires a staggering logistics. I mean, it's something that's just unthinkable in the scale of the undertaking. Now, the thing with Mark's 2023 says, "Good to see Mark being Mark Sloboda with you and Peter on Bullhorns, one of the best lineups on geopolitics." Oh, thank you very much. Very kind of you to say so. But just to go back to Israel, I mean, you're talking about driving out millions of people. Now, the problem is that nothing like that has been done, really, since World War II. In fact, it would be far greater than the scale of the displacement that the Israelis undertook during the so-called Nakba with the Palestinians. So that was, this would would pale in comparison. Now, um, the thing is also why driving the Palestinians out would be particularly problematic would be that this would be done in the teeth of resistance of Egypt, Jordan, um, Saudi Arabia, all of the Gulf states, and Egypt would certainly close its borders and will not permit any kind of a displacement of the Palestinians. So if Israel were to do this, it would effectively mean war with Egypt. Now, again, Israel wouldn't undertake such a thing without the approval of the United States. So, in effect, the United States would be going to war against Egypt, which is one of its client states. I mean, one of its key client states, really, ever since the 1970s, when Anwar Sadat abandoned the Nasser policy and took Egypt into the American-led camp. So Egypt would resist. So that America goes to war with Egypt. America then goes to war with Jordan. Again, two key American allies, historic American allies, and of course, again, Saudi Arabia would obviously also absolutely refuse to go along with anything like that. So I just think this is just a completely pie in the skies talk, that it cannot happen. It cannot be done. Now, I know Trump said the other day something like, well, Israel's a very small country, it needs territory. Again, how are you going to do it? I mean, what's the mechanism? Again, if Trump were to do this, and really, Trump is a very pragmatic sort of person. He talks big, but ultimately he is a deal maker. He's somebody who comes to an agreement. So despite all of the bravado about the things that he's going to do, he usually settles for something far, far less than any extreme solution. So the question then is, why would Trump sign on to a fanatical Zionist project like displacing millions of Palestinians from the Gaza and the West Bank? Now, if Trump were an ardent Zionist, then you could say, okay, because he's an ardent Zionist and believes that this land has been promised to Israel. God promised this land to Israel. I mean, okay, if you want to believe that. And again, there are people around Trump who do believe that. Elise Stefanik clearly believes that. Mike Huckabee clearly believes that. But Trump doesn't. That's not what Trump does. I mean, Trump has, he doesn't have 4 years. He basically has 2 years in which to get things done. Now, maybe when it comes to foreign policy, he has a little bit longer because even if he suffers setbacks in the midterms, loses control of the House, I don't think he'd lose the control of the Senate, but I think he would lose control of the House. And that would obviously hamper his domestic agenda. And at the very least, he would have to deal with some impeachment nonsense from the Democrats. But so he wants to accomplish some goals. Now, someone said, oh, yeah, that's it. That's the goal he wants to accomplish. He wants to accomplish this greater Israel. Why would he do that? What's great Israel to him? He doesn't care about that. What he would like to do is to come up with some big grand plan like the Abraham Accords, in which Saudi Arabia signs on and Saudi Arabia recognizes the state of Israel. And that would be a very big deal if Saudi Arabia were to do that. But there's no way in the world Saudi Arabia is going to do that if Israel embarks on a massive ethnic cleansing campaign and drives the Palestinians out of Gaza, presumably Palestinians out of the West Bank, into Egypt, in the face of um, ferocious opposition from Egypt and of course Jordan. That would basically put bait to the Trump presidency, because Trump will be seen to be signing off of something so extreme, so cruel, so horrific that it would be the end of his presidency. In other words, people will look back nostalgically on the Biden years. I mean, and that's very important to remember. I mean, Trump at the moment is enjoying a favorable comparison with Biden, because the Biden years were so terrible, both economically, on the question of mass uncontrolled immigration, and of course in terms of the foreign policy, two terrible wars over which both of which Biden enabled, and Biden had no idea how to bring to an end. So because those years were so awful, now Trump enjoys a certain measure of popularity by comparison. But if Netanyahu were to undertake this terrible ethnic cleansing campaign, and if this would involve a war with Egypt and Jordan, two of America's most stalwart and loyal allies in the Middle East, and this would be a complete catastrophe for Trump. And people suddenly say, "Hey, it was better under Biden. At least we weren't going to war against Egypt under Biden." So I don't think it's going to happen. That's not the way Trump thinks. If one tries to figure out how the mentality of Trump, which is always very difficult to do. He is someone who loves frenetic activity. I mean, that's he's always been like this. Just a lot of frenetic activity. He likes to throw a lot of balls up in the air, and then he hopes to score some victories. So if you look at these tariffs, so he did the tariffs with Colombia. And he scored some nice, easy victories when Colombia caved to pressure, which is obviously Colombia was going to cave to pressure. I mean, there's no way Colombia is going to win an economic war against the United States. So he got himself a victory. Then today he signs an agreement with El Salvador on taking migrants, helping, for a price. El Salvador will house deported migrants from the United States. Again, he pays some money. Trump doesn't care about spending money. I think that's how you do business. That's the price of doing business. A victory. Then we had he made the 25% tariff threats against Canada and Mexico, and they've come to an agreement to hold off on introducing tariffs, and then Mexico and Canada have both promised to do something about the border, to do something about fentanyl, and then we'll see what happens after 30 days, whether Trump will decide to go through with the introduction of the tariffs, or whether he'll decide, what, Mexico and Canada, they're being good neighbors, and so on. Now, these are all very pragmatic actions. But what's striking about these actions, particularly on the tariffs, is that it enables Trump to score some victories. At least they can be debate naturally. The Washington Post, CNN. Oh no, Trump didn't really win anything. Trump may claim that Mexico and Canada caved, but no, it was actually the Trump who caved because Mexico and Canada were going to do this anyway. You can argue like this, till the cows come home. It's a waste of time. It's seen to be a victory for the United States because we have Mexico and Canada making commitments about doing something about the border, and that's what the United States insists upon. You got to do something about the border. We can't have this nonsense of people entering the country in this uncontrolled way. So but the corollary of that, even while I would say, okay, I think Trump got the better of this. I don't care what the Washington Post says. I don't care what the New York Times says. Trump got the better of this because he's got commitments from both Mexico and Canada to address the border issue. That's what you need. That's been the problem for the United States. These two neighbors aren't doing enough about the border. They're not doing enough about drugs. Okay. The problem, however, the deeper one, which is what is the purpose of the tariffs? I mean, the idea behind tariffs, and this is when Trump has been championing tariffs all this time. The idea behind it is that it allows your domestic industries to thrive behind protective barriers. So in other words, you're not going to be subjected to unfair competition, cheap labor, lax environmental regulations, subtle subsidies from government, or all kinds of things. And instead, you're going to have your domestic industries growing behind these protective barriers, providing employment, and ensuring that once again the United States will be an industrial powerhouse, the kind it was, at the end of the 19th century and for much of the 20th century. That's the goal of the tariffs, and that's what Trump promised, and that's why he said, "Well, I'm a huge fan of tariffs," and that I think makes a lot of sense. But what Trump is doing now is essentially using tariffs in order to threaten, coerce, and extract concessions from other states. Well, that really doesn't really achieve very much, because if your goal is to make America great, if your goal is make America an economic powerhouse once again, then you need to take tariffs seriously. You need to put them on, keep them on, and make sure that they're there in order to, and it's a long-term project, U.S. industries to grow and become the leading industries in the world and provide employment. And that you got to, the issues is just, hey, we've got to provide employment, good employment for Americans. That we're providing good jobs for Americans. In other words, we're moving away from the era when we were running trade deficits, and trade deficits mean that you're exporting jobs. Jobs are going overseas, and therefore other countries are enjoying a fruitful employment, but Americans aren't. And therefore, instead of good manufacturing jobs in the United States, Americans are forced to do all kinds of bullshit work. I don't know, either at best, fake jobs like telemarketing or public relations, or even worse, flipping hamburgers, working in restaurants. You say, no, we don't want that. We want Americans to be employed in manufacturing industries. That's the idea. That's the idea behind tariffs. That's something different from what Trump is now doing, because he's now simply saying, well, I'm just going to use tariffs because every country is terrified of tariffs, so they're terrified of being excluded from the American market, and therefore I can get countries to do what I tell them to do. Well, that's a different issue. That's a very different agenda from the idea that we want good jobs for Americans in America. That's a very different agenda, and that's why what he did with Mexico and Canada. I'm all for tariffs. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I think every government has an interest in ensuring that it has key industries that maintains key industries, that they're strategic industries, and that they're protected from competition, that they're kind of signature industries for the country, like the auto industry, aerospace industry, pharmaceuticals. So these are signature industries. We want them. We're not going to allow them just to be wiped out by foreign competition. And so that I think is clearly an interest, and I think is clearly an interest in your country's workforce having good industrial jobs. That was really the key to American prosperity during the 20th century. That you had these great industries that employed American workers and paid well. Those were good paying jobs. Detroit, boom. Those are great paying jobs. Jobs for workers, for middle class, and that's it. And you want to do that rather than have people living in a very precarious existence. So if you're working at a restaurant or whatever, a bartender, that's a precarious existence. You don't want people having precarious existence. You want them to being reliable jobs, good, solid employment, and the likelihood of bankruptcy and loss gone. So I think that's a reasonable goal. But if you're going down this path of just using tariffs as a means of coercing other countries, and then all they have to do is go to Trump and say, "Oh God, all right, what do you want us to do? What what do you want us to agree to in order for you to lift these tariffs?" And then Trump lifts the tariffs, then you haven't really accomplished anything. And I think that's I think the limitation of Trump's transactional approach. Now, another aspect of the limitations of Trump's transactional approach is the issue of Ukraine. Now, as we know, and we've discussed many times before, the consensus view in the alt media is that Trump will push Ukraine under the bus. Zelensky will be pushed under the bus, and then finally order will prevail. The grown-ups will be in charge, and this war will be brought to an end. We've heard this song and dance for 3 years. It hasn't happened. But now it's okay. Well, that was Biden. Now Trump's in power, and Trump will say, this is ridiculous. I'm not interested in this war. I don't care about Ukraine. I don't care about Zelensky. I don't care about NATO. I just want this to brought to an end. So that's been the view, I think, of the alt medium. Now, I've always thought this was very unlikely, because um, the it was always that it was unlikely Trump was just simply going to throw overboard something that's now been a major investment by NATO, by the United States. So this has been a big, big investment. A lot of money has now been sunk into Ukraine. A lot of America's and NATO's prestige has been sunk into Ukraine. Seems very unlikely Trump would decide that he's just going to abandon the whole thing because he doesn't like Zelensky, doesn't like Ukraine, and whatever. It was always very unlikely. And Trump has never given any indication that he intends to do that. That recklessly, I would very much like to drive that bus. I mean, I guess on the issue of pushing Ukraine under the bus, I think it's great. I mean, I think that would be fantastic. However, I think it's very unlikely. And because I think Trump would not want the stench of American defeat and American humiliation attached to him. It absolutely would be his. If he were to push Zelensky under the bus, push Ukraine under the bus, and incidentally, this whole story, and the Russians are always putting out this story, particularly from their foreign intelligence, SVR, their foreign intelligence service. They're always putting out the story about how America is planning to push Zelensky under the bus. Any minute now, they're planning to push him under the bus. They've been saying this again for about 3 years. Now, there's a real problem with that. With as I say, Trump would have to own a humiliation defeat for NATO and the United States. It would be Trump's, and Trump's alone. And I don't think Trump has any interest in that. The other thing is that if you throw Zelensky under the bus, who takes over? I mean, is it, do you have an alternative who in some ways would play ball with the United States? And when you ask in that way, then you obviously realize how foolish all this talk about throwing Zelensky aside, because Zelensky has at no point has he in any way defied NATO, defied the United States. He has played along perfectly. He has done nothing that the Americans didn't want him to do. It's all been made up. This story that somehow the Americans want him to do this, and Zelensky somehow is being obdurate and making difficulties. It's never been that. There's never been any case of that. And this new theory, this new dumb theory, which is that Ukraine's on the brink of collapse, and therefore they need to get Zelensky out before there's total collapse and Russia marches into Kiev and Lvov and whatever. Now, that's the new thesis, Simplicius. I think Danaki is with us. Danaki, likes to quote Simplicius, who writes these 3 million word blogs every couple of days. So somehow, Ukraine's on the brink of collapse, and therefore the Western powers are desperate to remove Zelensky in order to prevent a total Ukrainian collapse and Russia marching into Kiev. So first of all, you got to keep, stipulate the following: Ukraine is not on the brink of collapse. Russia's not marching anywhere. Russia doesn't have the resources to march anywhere. They're not going to march to Kiev. But also, even the logic of the argument makes very little sense, because if you got rid of Zelensky, that would only hasten Ukrainian collapse. I mean, I think Zelensky is now pretty much associated with this war. If you suddenly moved him out, you don't have anyone to replace him with, and that would almost certainly lead to a complete collapse. So it just doesn't even make sense on its own terms. And as I say, Zelensky has been happy to play along. He's been, he knows perfectly well that ultimately his masters are in Washington. And this is where we get to Trump. Trump comes to this war and he says, well, it's not my war. I inherited it. On the other hand, I can't preside over the humiliation and defeat of the United States. So he's kind of been playing around with various ideas. He floated the notion of applying pressure against Russia, and now he's come up with a new concept, which is where Ukraine is a source of precious Ukraine owns these precious rare earths, rare earth metals, and we in the United States, we want to get our hands on them. So this appears. This is the transactional notion that that we basically we continue to fund Ukraine. We continue to arm Ukraine, but in return, we need those rare earth metals from Ukraine. We want to get our hands on them. But what's interesting about that is that Zelensky had already anticipated this. Zelensky is very clever. He has anticipated this. And if you go back to his victory plan from a few weeks ago, when he talked about the victory plan, he already had floated the idea of getting access to Ukraine's minerals. And there were others, Lindsay Graham had floated this notion: get our hands, on those rare earth metals, and because this is the kind of thing that appeals to Trump, and so Zelensky said, "Well, hey, you want to get your hands on this? We'll do that. We'll provide it for you." and that is there's going to be the key to Trump, because this he'll be able to sell it, because otherwise he was having difficulty. How do I sell continuing this war? It's not really my war. It's Biden's war, and I never would have started it. Wouldn't have happened under my watch. Putin agreed. Putin has said, no, I don't think it would have happened had Trump been president, and had Trump not had his election stolen from him in 2020. So again, Putin's going out of his way to keep Zelensky, to keep Trump happy. Zelensky is going out of his way to keep Trump happy. And so he says, okay, we're offering you carte blanche access to our precious metals. And then and for Trump then says, okay, well, I mean, then absolutely, let's continue arming Ukraine. After all, we're getting something from it. I mean, this is a business deal. We're getting, this is going to be vital to our American revival. We're getting these rare earth metals from Ukraine. And Sergeant Schultz talked about this. We can't possibly, we can't possibly, take these metals away from Ukraine when they're going to be absolutely essential for the rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine after the war. But for Trump, this is really the essence of it. He's saying, hey, well, this is the business. This is the business transaction. We're going to get something in return for our investment. We're going to, we're going to keep arming Ukraine, and we're going to get something in return. You remember when he talked about back in 2016 about the Iraq War? He was very critical of it. He was, constantly condemning George W. Bush and the war in Iraq, and it was always, the terrible. But the one thing that he would come back to with Iraq again, he condemned it. Weapons of mass destruction. That was a lot of nonsense. We were dragged into this war. It was never in our interest. We wasted a lot of money and so on. He did this during the 2016 campaign. But the one thing he continued to come back to is that, hey, we didn't get our hands on the oil. We should have kept the oil. He said all these terrible leaders, like Bush, like Obama, they didn't get their hands on the Iraq's oil. We should absolutely use that oil to pay for the war. So we simply lost those trillions of dollars for no reason at all, and we didn't even get our hands on the oil. So this is how Trump thinks about things. That he say, well, how can we make money on this? And I think that's why that Zelensky had already put this out. I mean, obviously, when he put out his victory plan, it was in anticipation of a good likelihood of Trump returning to power. And he made that pitch to Trump. Hey, you want to get your hands on our mineral resources? Hey, have at it. But you got to, come up with arms for us. Incidentally, he, Zelensky, was interviewed by the insufferable Piers Morgan. And in this interview, Zelensky did his usual thing of bringing up nuclear weapons. Once again, talks this absolute rubbish. But which again, a lot of people talk. That somehow Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994. They signed the Budapest Memorandum. There was some kind of a guarantees that were issued to Ukraine in 1994 in exchange for its giving up its nuclear weapons. And so Zelensky said, we want our nuclear weapons. Either you bring us into NATO, or we're gonna, we need our nuclear weapons. Now, as I've pointed out many, many, many times, Ukraine never had nuclear weapons. It's nonsense. Those are nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory. They were never under Ukrainian command. They were under Soviet command. There was all nuclear weapons are under Soviet command. Russia was the successor state of the Soviet Union, which means it was always under Russian command. There were nuclear weapons also based in Kazakhstan and in Belarus. What happened in 1994 was an agreement was signed for the transfer of these missiles back into the Russian Federation. And it kind of made sense because the Russian Federation controlled these nuclear weapons, and there was no reason for them to be on Ukrainian soil or Belarusian soil or Kazakh soil. And Americans coughed up some money for this. Somebody had to help with the transport of these missiles. But Ukraine never had missiles that were never under Ukrainian control. To suggest that somehow Ukraine had nuclear missiles that it gave up in 1994, it's like saying Italy has nuclear weapons on it, or Belgium has nuclear weapons, or Turkey has nuclear weapons, Germany has nuclear weapons. In all these countries, there are nuclear weapons on their territory, but they are absolutely solely under the control of the United States. So Italy is not a nuclear power, Turkey is not a nuclear power, Belgium is not a nuclear power, because these weapons are entirely under the control of the United States. So in the same way that these nuclear missiles in Ukraine or Belarus or Kazakhstan were under Russian control. And so, and this was somebody, I see U.S. Navy vet said about Professor Mearsheimer. And you're raising an absolutely important point. This U.S. Navy vet about Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer talks an absolute crap about this, because he said, "Well, I wrote in 1994 that Ukraine should not have given up its nuclear weapons." It's nonsense. It absolute utter nonsense. Ukraine did not have nuclear weapons. It was not a nuclear power. It was under Russian control. And for the alternative would have been for Ukraine to go to war not only against Russia. I mean, if Ukraine decided we're not going to give up they're not going to allow these weapons to be transferred to Russian territory, it would mean the Ukraine would have to go to war against Russia. It would have to go to war against the United States, because it was the United States that was insisting that all of Russia's nuclear missiles, all of its nuclear weapons, have to be transferred to the Russian Federation, because Russia was the successor state to the Soviet Union, and Russia and the Soviet Union was one of the officially 5 nuclear powers in the world. I mean, of course, there are other countries who have never admitted of their nuclear arsenal, but in accordance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and France were nuclear powers, and their responsibility was to ensure that nuclear weapons were not transferred to any other power. That's non-proliferation. In other words, no one else other than the 5 nuclear powers has nuclear weapons. So for Ukraine to hold on to any, saying, "Oh, well, we want them to stay on our territory," Ukraine would be in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Ukraine would almost certainly be subject or an attack by the United States. But Ukraine had also in 1990, at the time that it had declared, this was still while the Soviet Union was in existence. At the time, Ukraine had already declared when it declares its sovereignty. So just simply its declaration of sovereignty in 1990 had said Ukraine will not be a nuclear power. So it would have to go even against its own declaration in 1990 to say that somehow, we want these nuclear weapons. So nuclear was not, the very logic of this. How could Ukraine be a nuclear power in 1994 when in 1990 it had already declared that it is not going to have nuclear weapons, and that it intends to abide by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It said it in 1990. So how can it be a nuclear power in 1994? It makes no sense. And Mearsheimer is just talking through his hat. So, but Zelensky says, maybe we should talk about nuclear weapons. Having nuclear weapons to us. Now, obviously, this is obviously going to antagonize everybody. But Trump, he has a thing for anything that's unconventional, any kind of thinking outside the box. In the past, he had sort of floated ideas. Maybe South Korea should have nuclear weapons. Maybe Saudi Arabia should have nuclear weapons. So when Zelensky floated this to the repulsive, disgusting Piers Morgan, he kind of, again, was making a pitch to Trump, saying, well, okay, this might be one way of ending the war. you're always thinking of how can we bring this thing to an end? Yeah, this might be a way to bring it to an end. But let's have nuclear weapons. We'll be happy. Give us nuclear weapons. We can sign off on the loss of territories. We can even sign off on not being inducted into NATO. But just give us nuclear weapons. Now, of course, the internationalists, crowd. Oh my God, we got to have nuclear weapon, non-proliferation treaty, instability and whatever. And of course, it's a terrible idea. I mean, I absolutely agree that it's an absolutely horrific idea of Ukraine having nuclear weapons. But it just might appeal to Trump. You say, wait, what's wrong with that? Well, why can't we just, if he's happy with nuclear weapons, then why not? Why not give it to him? And then people will tell him, no, we can't do that. We got the non-proliferation treaty. We got the United Nations resolutions, and whatnot. We can't do that. And I don't think it's a doable plan. I don't think it's a viable idea. But I think Zelensky is making a pitch for Trump that it might appeal to him. There's somehow, because in a way, there was always a problem with the whole nuclear weapons dogma. I mean, there are many dogmas associated with nuclear weapons. Not one of them is exactly very convincing. But one of these the dogmas is that somehow nuclear weapons can only be limited to a handful of countries, and no one else must have them. But that of course raises the question: why must only a few countries have them? I mean, why can't other countries have them? I mean, if nuclear weapons are so good for purposes of defense and deterrence, because if you have nuclear weapons, no one messes with you, then why can't other countries have nuclear weapons? I mean, that was always a problem, and I think this problem was raised by back in the day Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, Iran. Other countries said, we kind of need these because it's the guarantee of our survival. So that was always a problem, and I think Trump sees that there's something, the whole nuclear doctrine is really quite questionable. I mean, in other dogma that's very dubious about nuclear weapons is that well, if you have them, then you are ready to use them. So that guarantees your safety. Well, we got nuclear weapons. That's it. We're gonna if we come under attack, we're gonna use them. Well, if you use them, you're committing national suicide. You're ensuring that your country ceases to exist, because if you use them, they're going to be used against you. So it's not plausible. It's like somebody threatening to commit suicide. It's not a plausible threat. I mean, yes. I mean, obviously there are people who are suicidal, but by and large, it's not a plausible threat. And so when states threaten that they are ready to use nuclear weapons, that's it. Because I'm ready to use it, and you say, well, yeah, but if you use it, it's going to be used against you. Are you ready for your complete annihilation? Well, the answer is no. In which case, of course, nuclear weapons are of very limited utility. And I think that's what we've found, particularly since the start of this whole so-called special military operation and NATO's involvement, is that Russia has repeatedly threatened NATO. They talk about a red line. Your playing with fire. This could trigger a nuclear war, and and so on. And NATO, particularly, the NATO leaders like Boris Johnson, have said, we don't believe you. We don't believe you're going to use nuclear weapons. Even if we lob missiles into your territory, we're going to start hitting targets inside your territory, which you think is, it's a red line cross because it's NATO is attacking Russian territory and so on. We don't believe that you're going to resort to nuclear weapons. And so therefore, when you threaten us, we just simply I'm not buying it. And that is the central problem of deterrence. You're not deterring anyone because no one believes you're going to use the nuclear weapons. And if they don't think you're going to use them, then their utility disappears. I think Kissinger famously, said sometime in the 1970s, I think when he was still Secretary of State, he was being attacked for these arms control agreements that he was negotiating with the Soviet Union, and the gravamen of these criticisms was, hey, you're leaving. The Soviet Union is going to have more nuclear weapons than we have. They're going to have more missiles. They're going to have more warheads, more throw weight. Remember this, more throw weight. They got more bombers. And so, in the Soviet Union will have strategic superiority. And then Kissinger, I think, famously said, what in God's name is strategic superiority? What do you do with it? And that's the point. What do you do with it? Are you really seriously we're going to have a nuclear war? And then, well, we won because we actually had more missiles than they did, and our warheads had greater throw weight than their warheads, so we won. I mean, yes, a couple of 100 million people were killed, but we won the war. I mean, it's nonsensical. And so, but that's why. But the Proliferation Treaty, if you do accept the concept that if you have nuclear weapons, then no one messes with you, and that therefore nuclear weapons have a utility because they serve as a deterrent, then why wouldn't other states say, yeah, we want that? I mean, if you, the British, the French, the Americans, the Russians, if you have them, why can't we have them? It's a good argument, and no one's really come up with an effective argument against it, and that's why I think Trump would find the argument quite appealing. If Zelensky were to say, okay, we'll bring this war to an end, but promise us to provide us with nuclear weapons. Now, of course, the Russians wouldn't be terribly happy with it, and so that there would be that. And so, but again, as I say, I just think that it's the kind of arguments that might be appealing to Trump. But again, trying to figure out what is in Trump's mind is I think a kind of a fool's errand. He clearly, I think, wants to clearly wants to bring this war to an end, and he's trying to figure out how he can do it, how he can offer something that would be, sufficiently appealing to both sides, and so that is that I think is going to be a real problem. Now, what might be appealing to the Russian side is some talk of having a global security conference. Um, and the sort of the Helsinki 2.0, that might that might be appealing. The problem, um, see the alternative. I mean, again, if we talk about the alt media, um, who insist that Russia's not going to accept any offers. Boom, Russia will not accept it. The Trump Kellogg plan involves freezing the conflict in place, and putting NATO membership on hold, at least kick it down the road, and maybe some limited sanctions relief. I don't know. There's some talk about that. And the assumption is no, Russia will not accept this because Russia's winning the war and Russia's going to keep the war going. I'm not convinced by that, because I don't think, as I said before, as I said at the beginning, I don't think Ukraine is on the brink of collapse. And if Ukraine's not on the brink of collapse, then this war continues. And as I said, the longer the war continues, the greater uncertainty there is, and then it could absolutely go either way. And these drone attacks that Ukraine is launching, by Ukraine I mean NATO and the United States are launching these drone attacks. These drone attacks are causing damage in Russia. I mean, they're clearly quite carefully crafted in order to hurt the Russian economy. They hit Russian industries, Russian oil refineries, oil depots, and so on. Now, you can say, well, what does it matter? Russia can rebuild and so on. Yeah, that's true. Russia can rebuild. But there's no shortage of drones. Drones are quite inexpensive. And you can just keep launching these attack after attack after attack. And after a while, they do cause damage. I mean, it's not that easy to keep rebuilding and repairing refineries and depots and airfields and arms factories and so on. Each attack causes damage. So that's another factor in this. I mean, if you say, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter because Russia's going to march into Kiev next week," yeah, if Russia marches into Kiev, fantastic. I mean, but what if it isn't? So therefore, you have to think about, what would Russia settle for, and then you would have to say that there may well be the basis of some kind of a deal. At least it brings the war to an end. Rather than just saying, "Oh well, we're just going to keep fighting because we're going to win." We're going, yeah, when? Another year, 2 years? What kind of casualties are you willing to sustain? I mean, this is serious business. Just how many casualties you're suffering. So that's why I don't believe that Russia would just simply, give Trump the back of the hand and say, no, we're not interested in your peace plan. We're just going to go ahead and crush Ukraine. I have my doubts, and so I think that when there is the something cobbled together, Russia will need to walk away with something that it can count as, well, we've accomplished this. And I do think that Trump and the people around Trump are smart enough to come up with a formula that Russia can accept and declare, yeah, we won. So they can come up with a formula about the Russian language. They can come up with a formula about the Russian Orthodox Church. Um, they can come up with a formula that issue of NATO membership that's postponed into the future. No more extolling of Nazis, at least in public. And give Russia a conference. Russia wants this conference. Let's have a global conference on security, a kind of Helsinki, and then Russia say, hey, look, we wanted a conference, we wanted a global conference, we wanted everyone to sit around the table, and then they can cobble together some sort of a document from this security conference. They can say, well, okay, we will absolutely make sure that no one's security is threatened, and we will be mindful of any actions that threaten anyone's security. Something along those lines. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I would have thought Trump and the people around Trump will be thinking along those lines. Have some sort of a formula that Russia can accept, because I believe, and here I distance myself from the sort of the alt media, because I believe Russia wants out of this war. I don't believe Russia wants to go on fighting, thinking that somehow at any moment now Ukraine's going to collapse. Any moment now we're going to march into Kiev and whatever. I don't think Russia thinks that. I think this is a figment of the alt media's imagination. For some reason, the SMO didn't work out according to plan. Now, we don't know exactly what the plan was. Doubtless we'll find out, but it didn't work out. Well, if it doesn't work out, then you have to do the next best thing. Achieve some kind of an agreement, and see where it goes. Now, the riposte will be, yeah, but if we accept the Trump plan, and you have an armistice, you have a ceasefire or whatever, it means that the war is going to start up again in 10 years. NATO is just simply going to use the interim period to arm Ukraine and prepare for the next round. Well, I think that's true. I think there's a good likelihood that that's what's going to happen. That the moment there is any kind of an armistice, NATO will use the interim period to arm Ukraine and prepare for the next round. There's nothing much you can do about that. I don't know how you can stop that short of a complete victory. I mean, if you haven't won, then you haven't won. I mean, there's no point in just saying, well, okay, we're going to keep fighting until complete victory. Well, until when? I mean, how many lives are you willing to go on expending? So that's why you could say, okay, it may be that NATO will do that, but it's also possible, who knows, that there might be it might work in the long term, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. I mean, if one thinks about previous kind of armistice agreements, some of them were effective. I mean, the Korean armistice proved to be quite enduring. The division of Germany proved to be quite enduring. I mean, no one would have thought necessarily that in 1945 this division of Germany would prove to be quite long lasting. Now, but sometimes they don't work. In Vietnam, the armistice and the partition of Vietnam at the Geneva Conference in 1954, at the 17th parallel, that didn't work. That absolutely didn't work. That was just an interim, and basically you're just preparing for the next round of fighting. And so sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. Now again, chances are this any kind of a deal in Ukraine will only be temporary. But then you have to ask, well, what's the alternative? The alternative, of course, is what people say. Well, of course, the alternative is Russia goes on fighting, because sooner or later Ukraine will collapse, and then Russia will have secured its fantastic victory over NATO. Okay, fine, but it hasn't happened yet, and I've seen no evidence that Ukraine is on the brink of collapse. We know about the difficulties of recruiting new personnel, but Ukraine has shown itself to be quite flexible in the way it's been fighting this war. So it clearly, yes, it's always had a shortage of manpower. It's always had a manpower problem relative to Russia, but the way it's used its drones has been quite effective. It's made up in its manpower shortages by other means. So we always have to then ask, okay, well, what's the alternative? If you say no to the Trump plan, and again, we don't know what the Trump plan is, but let's assume that Trump is going to come up with a plan. If you say no to that, then what's the alternative? Trump obviously would then escalate this war. He would then, absolutely embrace Zelensky. He's not going to embrace Russia. He's not going to embrace it. It's just he's given no indication that he regards Russia in any way as a kind of as an ally or anything. So whatever frustration and anger and dissatisfaction, disdain that he occasionally expresses towards Zelensky, he still basically treats Zelensky as an ally of the United States. He doesn't regard Russia as an ally. So if Russia then says, as this is again what the alt media says, okay, Russia will say no to any plan by Trump to freeze the conflict in place. Okay, then what's the alternative? The alternative is just to keep the war going. All right. That's a tall order, and it's what we were talking about yesterday or whatever about the Yalta and all the attacks over the years against the Yalta agreement. In fact, any of the wartime agreements, same kind of thing. All these attacks on these agreements. And the question then, it has to be raised. Okay, so you don't like this agreement. You don't like the fact that essentially Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe was accepted at Yalta, but even before that in Tehran and definitely in Potsdam. Okay, you don't like that. What's the alternative? That you're going to go to war with the Soviet Union for the sake of Eastern Europe? No, that wasn't a serious plan. No one was going to do it. So it was all the complaints about Yalta were beside the point. So in the same way, you say, okay, you don't want the Trump plan, and let's remember, Trump is coming up with a plan. Biden didn't have a plan. Biden and Blinken had no plan. Biden and Blinken simply said, we're going to keep arming Ukraine. We're going to keep this war going. We're going to keep killing destroying as many Russians as possible. We're going to just keep this going. We're going to keep weakening because we want to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. That was the Biden-Blinken plan. Trump is coming up with a plan. He says, I want to end this war. I don't, I'm not interested in, who won, Russia won, Ukraine won, whatever. I just want to end it. So that's a different tone. And therefore, the Russia will just simply say, oh, well, we're not interested. Now, if you say that to Trump, then you're basically risking, then Trump will say, oh, fine, you're not interested in ending it. That reinforces, the view of all the Russophobes and the hawks in my administration that you are the obstacle to peace. Up until now, I wasn't pretty sure who's the obstacle to peace. You say no, you're not interested in this plan, so then I will escalate in this war. May make a difference, may not make a difference, but in fact, but it means that the war goes on, and there's no real prospect of any kind of ending, because this was Trump. This was always the likeliest way of bringing this thing to an end. Somebody who's a kind of a pragmatic, transactional person, has no particular ideological preoccupations. So, just to summarize, I think that if he presents a plan through Kellogg, something like an armistice, plus some changes in the Ukrainian constitution, plus some kind of a global security conference, a la Helsinki 2.0. If it could come up something like that, I think the war could be brought to an end. And again, I know alt media, they refer, no, Russia is going to keep marching on to victory. I don't think that. Anyway, let's then take a look at. Oh, by the way, before we take a look at anything, earlier today I interviewed the Dragana Trifkovic from Serbia, the Center for Strategic Studies in Belgrade, and I think it was a very interesting interview. We talked a lot about Vucic, Alexander Vucic, and I've talked a great deal here about Vucic, and I think it was a very interesting discussion. And I think what came out from our discussion was that for all the protests and throughout Serbia and everything else, Vucic is sitting pretty. He goes on about, oh, I'm the victim of a color revolution. They're trying to overthrow me and whatever. And the Russians are repeating this color revolution, color revolution. They're trying to overthrow Vucic. Vucic enjoys a very favorable rating in the capitals that count, in Brussels and in Washington. He's done this very cleverly. He's well in with Trump. He's got a nice business deal that he offered to Jared Kushner, who's going to build some monstrosity in Belgrade. He's in with Rick Grenell, who's also close to Trump. So Trump's going to look upon him favorably. But he's also well in with the Europeans, because he's done everything they wanted from him. He's got that lithium extraction deal that the Germans like. He's purchased French fighter aircraft, so the French are happy. And he's been selling weapons to Ukraine, and he's been selling weapons to Israel. So he's done everything that the important powers want, So the students who are protesting with justice, how they detest uh, Vucic, really don't have a leg to stand on. And you notice no one is offering any kind of support for the students. No one in Brussels. Ursula von der Leyen hasn't said anything about the students. Annalena Baerbock hasn't said anything about the students. And while they're all up in arms about what's going on in Tbilisi, which they're very agitated about, they're saying nothing at all about Vucic. So it's kind of amusing that we have this whole thing about from Moscow, color revolution, they're out to get Vucic, and strangely, silence from Brussels, silence from Washington. I think they're well satisfied with Vucic's performance, and then you have to say um, that Vucic is a very skilled politician. I mean, he's a survivor. He's kept in with the Western powers, and he's managed to persuade the Serbian nationalists that he's a ferocious defender of Serbia's national interests, and that he's very pro-Russian, even though he doesn't do anything to help Russia. So anyway, so listen to this conversation with Dragana Trifkovic. Anyway, let's go to our locals page. This is where the people cough up, to keep the uh, put money into the tip jar in order to ensure that the dogs, these ferocious dogs, are on an even keel, because they do get very, very upset. And when they're upset and enraged, they usually take out their fury on me. And so, so these people are putting money into the tip jar just to ensure that they just don't go for my throat, which they have done at times in the past. So I really appreciate the generosity of our contributors, and who basically they worry about my livelihood. That take what happens if Apple just simply puts a chokehold on me, and what happens to me then? Anyway, Danaki, always good to see you, Danaki, says, Kedves, George, dear George, has the multipolar world called already? Ah. Is NATO dead? Is the dollar buried? Is USAID truly dying, or just rebranding with a MAGA hat? Maduro, you ain't getting off that easy, buddy. Or did Panama cave like yet another little bitch in 24 hours? Yes, looking at you, Colombia. Please wake me up by the time esteemed piece of shit grifter analyst Pepe Escobar pens his next masterpiece article proclaiming the true birth of multipolarity in the land of milk and honey, baby. Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. BRICS has always been one of these wonderful con jobs. Every time there's a BRICS meeting, and they happen regularly. I always get invited onto some alt media um, broadcasts or podcasts, and they always ask me then to say, well, is this the beginning of the end of the unipolar moment? Is this the end of the U.S. led order? And I have to really let them down gently. That's what I do. I let people down gently. I don't think so, because we've been talking about this alternative to the dollar for a long time. We've been talking about how the BRICS is going to uh, come up with its own currency. It's going to come up with a kind of reserve currency of its own. It's going to come up with a formula to enable countries to get around U.S. European sanctions, so that they'd be able to trade in non-dollar currencies, and none of that has ever happened. And to the contrary, Putin regularly boasts, saying, no, we have no intention of replacing the dollar. We never had any intention of replacing the dollar. We're very happy to work with the dollar. It's the dollar that shuns us. But otherwise, we'd be really happy with the dollar. Well, we know that. I mean, for some reason, you know, which we still don't know why you know Russia left $300 billion of sovereign assets. They left that in the foreign banks, which were seized in the aftermath of the so-called special military operation. Again, I had been under the assumption, I guess a lot of people were under the assumption, that Russia was moving out of the dollar, Russia was moving out of the euro, precisely because if you keep your money in dollars or euros, that enables the Western powers to seize your assets whenever they want to. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they did at the start of the SMO. So, yeah, I mean, that would be the minimum of creating an alternative to the Western-led order. So Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has just written another one of his articles I don't know, is it called Russia in International Affairs? I think whatever that Russian magazine is called. This article is on the Russian Foreign Ministry site, and the article is naturally about multipolarity, which is a particular issue of Lavrov's. But the point is that we're not getting any sense of where's the multipolarity. Any economic war, trade war between the United States and China, the United States is going to win that. I mean, it's clear that yes, we had the Trump imposing tariffs, and the Trump tariffs have now gone into effect. This is on top of the tariffs that he had imposed during his first term. So he's got another tariffs now. China has retaliated, but it's clear that China is very reluctant about retaliating because he doesn't really believe that it can win a trade war with the United States. I mean, that's the point, that China really is economically quite vulnerable. And that's the problem, is that when you're talking about BRICS, is that each of these countries, and that's mainly, essentially Russia and China are the only ones that are serious players in the world, they are seen to be quite vulnerable. If you're Trump, and you look at Russia, what are the two things you conclude? And leave aside whether Trump is right or he's not right, but he's going to conclude, first of all, you haven't been able to defeat Ukraine, a country a fifth of your size, for 3 years. Okay. Two, you haven't been able to drive the Ukrainian forces out of Kursk in 6 months. Okay. You didn't do anything to defend your client Bashar al-Assad in Damascus. No, because that's how Trump would see it. So why would Trump conclude that, wow, Russia is a really serious player in the world? That's a, you don't want to mess with Russia. That's a serious major economic and military power. Now, okay, if you want to provide reasons why that view is wrong and so on, and give us why it's taken so long in Ukraine and about Kursk and about Assad, that's fine. I mean, I'm sympathetic to those arguments, but that's not how the United States would see it. If you're trying to persuade the Americans, this is a multipolar world, and you don't get to call the shots, because we've got all these other powers, that they're really, really important. Why would the Americans be persuaded by this? Why would they think that somehow we need to worry about Russia? And again, even about China, it says, well, you're saying to China, you want to have a trade war with us? I don't think you're going to win this. And that's the point. I don't think China's going to win a trade war with the United States. And I don't think China thinks that it can win a trade war with the United States. So, you know, and so when Putin says, well, we never really planned on creating a currency, an alternative to the dollar. We never intended to create an alternative reserve currency. Well, yeah, you basically you're giving away the plot. I mean, because people like some Danaki mentioned. I mentioned some of the people who've been advocating for this. They've been telling us that any minute now, the United States will be displaced as the dominant power in the world, and I think we're very far from that. So again, you can read this article by Lavrov, but the problem I have with this article, as I've always had with anything that Lavrov says or writes, is if you have to say it, that means it's not happening. If you have to keep repeating that the world it's a multipolar world, it means that it isn't a multipolar world. You're trying to persuade people of something that isn't the case. If it really were a multipolar world, we wouldn't need to be told about it. In other words, if we thought, whoa, you don't want to mess with India. India is a really that's a serious player. We'd know about it. So it's like when you keep saying something, it means essentially no one really believes that that you have a multipolar world, because then you wouldn't have to say it. And there's Lavrov in this article saying, "Well, we want Brazil and India as permanent members of the UN Security Council." Okay, I mean, I guess I don't see anything wrong with that. It's not going to happen. because because the United States isn't going to agree to Brazil becoming a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They might agree to India, but it's hard to see India as having grand geo-political planetary goals as a great power. But there's no way that anyone's going to agree to Brazil being a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's just it's a nice idea, but as I say, it's like you can go on saying this, that it's a multipolar world till the cows come home, but until we see evidence that it really is a multipolar world, it just isn't going to happen just because you keep saying it. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. And then Marx 2023 says, George, what is your view of the shock therapy carried out by Gaida and Chernomyrdin? Personally, I hold them both, along with Yeltsin, in very low regard. Jeffrey Sachs being one of the architects of the failed policy. I couldn't agree with you more. I think they were terrible. This was a terrible policy that was pursued, and obviously the goal was to eliminate Russia as a major economic power. I mean, the point is that the Soviet Union had built up this massive industrial capacity. Now, yes, it was the old industry. This was the old industrial revolution: coal, steel, crude oil, infrastructure, roads, railways, rolling stock. This was the stuff that you built during the first industrial revolution. The Soviet Union did it very well, and it made it a very formidable economic power. But of course, the Soviet Union obviously started running into problems when the next industrial revolution, with computers, electronics, consumer goods. The Soviet Union wasn't really doing so well there, and particularly areas like computers. Um, and that obviously was a problem. But nonetheless, once you start just dismantling what the Soviet Union had accomplished, that was going to have a catastrophic consequences. And the goal obviously was to eliminate Russia as a serious economic power. Because you always, when you have the basics, of economic power, then that's it. It doesn't matter, however uh, primitive may be, or roads and railways and coal mines and whatever. However primitive, it's the foundation for economic power and the foundation for military power. You got to have this, and produce, and therefore you can then have arms factories and so on, which is how the Soviet Union did it, despite the fact that it was economically relatively backward compared to the United States and Europe. It nonetheless had this enormous economic strength and therefore its military strength. It was in a position to intimidate the West because it has the rudiments of a powerful economy, and thanks to that privatization plan, Russia lost that. Has never really recovered from that. So um, and so yeah, I mean that it was. I think the whole thing was just absolutely tragic because whatever you can think about the communism, whatever you think about the Soviet Union, um, it had great accomplishments, and there had to have been a better way of easing the transition from that Soviet state command economy to a more modern kind of state managed capitalism, whatever that would be the alternative, and to maintain that state, that huge multinational state, with its 15 republics, just to allow the whole thing to collapse, both as a political entity. Everyone goes his own way, but even in terms of its economic strength, yeah, I think that's criminal, absolutely criminal, what Gorbachev and Yeltsin did. And then Robert, thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate it. Hope everything is going well in New Jersey. Every time I see you, I always kind of have nostalgic feelings about New Jersey. I have to say, I really kind of like the state. I mean, every time I went there, it always was very very nice. A lovely kind of. I mean, I don't know the state that well, but whenever I saw it, there's lovely suburbs in New Jersey, and of course it had Atlantic City, and I did enjoy going to Atlantic City. But anyway, Robert so says, talking to Megyn Kelly, Marco Rubio has said that it's, quote, it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. Yes, that was an anomaly. It was a product of the end of the Cold War, but eventually you were going to reach back to a point where you had a multipolar world, multi great powers in different parts of the planet. And then Robert asked, do you think this signals a meaningful move to reform U.S. foreign policy, as the plan to shut down USAID suggests? That's a very, very interesting a question, because you're absolutely right. When he says that, you think, well, okay, that's a very, quite humble, quite modest comment. You're saying, yeah, well, there's other powers. It's a multipolar world. You can't have one state dominating. Now, I find it difficult to believe that the United States is really going to accept. Well, it's just a multipolar world. We have to, other countries, they have their own interests, and we have to adapt ourselves to their own interests. and we share the planet with them. And what are you going to come up with next? That somehow we believe in the United Nations, and we believe in uh, reaching consensus on all the big issues at the United Nations. I don't think so. I don't really believe it. I have to think that Marco Rubio has probably thought about these things, and I think he means well. I do think that everything that he said in Megyn Kelly would suggest that I think he means well. I think he's well intentioned, and I think he does think that we have to take into account other countries and other countries' interests. Now, what does that really amount to? And there I tend to think that this is not dissimilar to the talk from George W. Bush. Remember George W. Bush back in 2000, 2001 talked about a humbler United States. That somehow we have to be humble. We can't go around throwing our weight around. We have to listen to other powers. And then so that was George W. Bush, 2001, humbler United States. And then of course we had Barack Obama, 2009, where he did his apology trip. So he went to throughout the Muslim world apologizing. Oh, apparently we Americans we've been really rough. We've been throwing our weight around, and we've been making life miserable for the Muslims. And, I mean, no wonder people have come to dislike us. But here I am coming cap in hand and saying, that, well, we're turning over a new leaf. We promise we're going to be listening to you. We're not going to be bullying anymore. And this goes back even before that. When FDR, with his good neighbor policy, we have to stop bullying the countries in our hemisphere. We got to listen to our neighbors in Latin America. I mean, that was a good neighbor. But when FDR sent Orson Welles to make a film about the Rio festival, which turned into a complete disaster for a variety of reasons. But that was the FDR good neighbor policy, and of course again Kennedy did this, with a variation of that with the Organization of American States. This was. Have to be very respectful. We have to be respectful of our neighbors. So I tend to think that Rubio is just following in this tradition. I don't believe that the United States is constitutionally capable of listening to other countries, of taking seriously their concerns, and on kind of sharing the global platform with others. It says this. It's very very good. One president after another used to say this. But it's never materialized, and it always happens very early on in any administration. Those first 6 months, whether it's the president or the Secretary of State, is really promises to turn over a new leaf. We're going to be listening to our to our allies and partners. We're not going to be doing any bullying or anything like that. Nixon was another one. Nixon in 1969, soon after he was inaugurated, he made this trip to Europe. And so, well, why did he go to Europe? Well, he told you, well, all these years, we've been preoccupied in Vietnam, and we haven't paid enough attention to you Europeans, our closest friends and allies. Here I am, I'm ready to work with you and to listen to you, and I'm very, very sorry that we didn't pay enough attention to you during the Johnson Vietnam years. So I think it's something that administrations do during the first 6 months, they managed to get a good press for it because they're saying, "Well, this is good." I like this kind of talk. But people like Obama's talk. When Obama went to Cairo and he delivered that Cairo speech, oh, this is good. He promises he's not going to be bombing Muslim countries anymore. Well, that went out of the window pretty quickly. So George W. Bush, oh yeah, humble, yeah. Let's do the humble thing. Um, so therefore, I am a little skeptical about what Rubio says, though I do think that he probably means it. I do think that that he probably means well. I just don't see it. And of course, he's already thrown the gauntlet down to Panama. He went to Panama and read them the Riot Act. So there wasn't really that much. Hey, we're going to listen to our Panamanian friends. That's another one. Remember, Jimmy Carter signed the Panama Canal Treaty early on in his administration. When again, you know, you know, we're doing the good. We're being the good boy. I said, well, we have to be respectful to the Panamanians. Hey, it's your canal. We're gonna give it to you. Enjoy it. Do what you want with it. See how much we like and respect you. So early on within the Carter administration. But Rubio has already gone to Panama and said, you better get those Chinese out of here if you know what's good for you. So it wasn't quite a particularly friendly, avuncular approach. So yeah, get with the program. Anyway, Mark's 2023 says, George, America cannot be saved. It's impossible. China is so advanced in manufacturing. China owns the supply chain and has the best logistics in the world by a country mile. Well, we'll see. Reckless A says, I would very much like to drive that bus. The bus to run over Zelensky. Trump has no reason to save Ukraine or Zelensky. He can blame it all on Biden. Trump also couldn't care about the EU. Well, that's an interesting point. I don't agree with you there because I don't think Trump is just going to, it just doesn't happen. No one ever does that. The idea of saying, oh, it's all Biden's, it's all my predecessor, so I don't really care what happens to Ukraine. I don't really care what happens to the EU. Nobody ever does that. Every leader basically inherits the war of his predecessor and then tries to make the best of it, tries to come up with some conclusion to the war that at least you can maintain your self-respect. So that's why I don't think once Trump is told, do you realize that this will be the end of NATO? Do you realize that this will be a complete collapse if we don't achieve our goals in Ukraine? I mean, Trump was saying, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go down in history as the man who lost Ukraine. And there's nothing to indicate in anything that he has ever said or done to suggest that he's really just going to tear everything up. He had a number of opportunities during his first term, to make drastic changes. He didn't do it. So I think he wants to bring it to an end. I don't think he's going to bring it to an end by somehow admitting a defeat, particularly as there's no need to, because basically Russia hasn't won. I mean, why should he do anything to enable Russia to declare victory when it hasn't won? So I don't see the reason for it. And I mean, you're right. Of course, it's Biden's war. But then Vietnam was Kennedy and Johnson's war. But Nixon nonetheless pursued it and went ahead with 4 years before he finally extricated the United States from it. So I don't think he'll think in terms of, oh, it's Biden's war, so what the hell do I care? Anyway, Um, so and uh, and then we have Marty. Always very good to see you. And we have. And Danaki says, "Do you really believe there are trillions of dollars of rare earths that would actually be exploitable, marketable? Sure looks like one of them great bridge to sell your offers." That you know, I don't disagree with that. I think that's quite likely. Somebody told Trump. Obviously, he heard it from somebody that there are these trillions of dollars worth of rare earths in Ukraine. And remember, Lindsey Graham had been talking along those lines for some time. Oh, there are these really precious metals in Ukraine. We can make a real bundle here. Uh, it was always a way as a pit to pitch it to Trump. So Trump didn't know anything about this. Somebody said, "Hey, you want to make a lot of money," and they know that this is how he thinks. They remember him was saying in Iraq, "Well, I didn't think Iraq was a great idea. In fact, I thought it was a lousy idea. But having done that, we should have kept the oil." And irrespective of the fact that it's a completely idiotic idea, how do you just keep the oil somebody else's oil? I mean, at the very least, you're going to have to maintain a massive military presence in Iraq to keep the oil. But how do you keep the oil? I mean, it's not your oil to keep. But he said, "Oh, no, we should keep the oil." So you say, "Hey, what about Ukraine? Yeah, it's costing us money. Hey, but what about if you can pay for this Ukraine war with these precious metals?" Oh, well, that's an idea. This is how you pitch it um, to Trump. I mean, it's like why suddenly you're talking. Hey, what about building nice coastal resorts in Gaza? You got a beautiful Mediterranean coastline there, lovely climate. You could make some money on those beachfront properties in Gaza. That kind of would and does appeal to Trump. He tries that with North Korea, Kim Jong Un. Hey, there's a lot of money to be had. Here's a real good, you know fine real estate, good soil here. We can make some real money here in North Korea. So it's a way of pitching it to Trump. Obviously it's unrealistic because hey, there are intractable political problems that you've got to solve before you start building your beachfront properties. Um, and um, um, so anyway, okay. Okay, MRD says Russia now has powerful weapons that are not nuclear. One hears on the media, so they are free of any nuclear treaties in a way. Yeah, I mean they have those weapons, but again, you're going to have the issues. I mean, if you have these powerful weapons and then you use powerful weapons, nuclear, non-nuclear, and they cause a lot of damage, you're still liable to retaliation. I mean, that's always been the problem because, of course, you have other powers that would retaliate. Ukraine, of course, cannot retaliate, but that's not really the issue. The issue is, well, will the NATO powers retaliate? Now, I think that at an early stage of the war, when Russia enjoyed the element of surprise, because it did catch the Americans, it caught the Europeans, everybody by surprise. They didn't really think Russia would go through with this. At that moment, you could have done a lot of things because the opposition was just all over the place, and you could have used your devastating weapons and just simply use shock and awe. Um, Now it's a little more difficult. So now, if you do, these serious weapons, nuclear, non-nuclear, yeah, this Oreshnik. Now you're risking retaliation, particularly with Trump in the White House. So that's why, again, another way in which Russia's options doesn't have too many good options at the moment, particularly with Trump in the White House. You use one of those Oreshnik, that'll piss Trump off, and he might do something quite nasty. And so, Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for your generosity. Um, I, I haven't read your comment yet on Carl Nielsen, because I'm very interested in what you think of Carl Nielsen, which was the composer that we featured in recent Gaggle Music Club. I think Nielsen's one of these relatively unknown, unheralded great composers, and I think his work, is I think on a par with Mahler and Shostakovich, who was his contemporaries. And so I'd be interested, Anne Marie, what you think of it, of Carl Nielsen. But anybody who hasn't listened to it yet, please do so. Carl Nielsen, it's on the Gaggle Music Club. And while you're at it, please watch To Kill a Mockingbird, which is part of our Monday Night at the Movies, which we had on last night. So please watch that. It's free for members, and if you have any thoughts about To Kill a Mockingbird, please share your thoughts with us. And what might be great is if somebody can come up with ideas for the next poll for movies screening. So we had people being unfairly accused of sex crimes. This was the last week's feature. So I'd be interested what I think it would be good. Now, I think an idea. I think it was Marty who suggested that, but utopia and dystopia. I think that's a good idea. So that's a possibility. But anybody could come up with some ideas of what we can, some films around the particular theme, and then we can just make a selection as to which one to watch. Now, Marty, who has a knack of digging things up. I mean, I don't know how he does it. He just finds all kinds of films and features or whatever. I can't find them. But I was thinking today, I mean, apropos of nothing much, that Nikita Khrushchev in 1960, and there was the four-power conference in Paris. This was in 1960, May 1960, and the Americans had resumed, unbeknownst to anyone, probably even unbeknownst to Eisenhower, they resumed the U-2 spy flights over the Soviet Union. And so while this conference was taking place, the Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane and captured the pilot, Gary Powers. And Khrushchev was absolutely enraged by this, understandably. I mean, you're having a peace conference, and then you're basically, the Americans are still spying on you. And he basically said, "That's it. I'm canceling this conference." And then he went before the journalists, a press conference, and he went into this ferocious tirade, absolutely enraged. This tirade. This was a kind of a quite famous news conference by Nikita Khrushchev after the shooting down of the U-2. But what is particularly striking was there was a moment in this ferocious tirade when he was being heckled by the German journalists. There's Germans who were there, and he turned on them and he said, you German bastards. He was speaking in Russian. You German bastards. Let me just tell you what we do with cats who get into a pigeon cart. We pick up the cat by the tail and smash his head against the ground. That was his threat to the Germans. We pick the cat up by the tail and we smash his head against the ground. So this is an amazing kind of talk. A foreign leader, the leader of the Soviet Union, essentially saying, you pick a cat up by the tail and smash his head against the ground. Anyway, the reason, I'm saying is that, if Marty, you can find this, because I've seen it and I heard him saying this, but if you can find this, that would be great, and we could post it on the Gaggle board, particularly as it kind of brings back a time when the Russians had a very plain, brutal way of expressing themselves in a way that intimidated others. Sadly, Russians have lost that. They're now too mild, too polite, and they easily get pushed aside. And so I was just thinking, well, boy, that was a time when people were just absolutely terrified of Soviet leaders in general, but of Nikita Khrushchev in particular. Anyway, Danaki says, let me just get this. Where's Danaki? Yes, Danaki says, George, you and I already know what the outcome of that security conference would be. Danaki is even more cynical than I am. NATO would renege on any deal and leave Putin to whine about being led by the nose yet again, so that the telegram laments of idiot goddess Zaharova and so on. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, that will be the final outcome. That there'll be the conference, and then 2 years later, when surprise, surprise, NATO is just pouring just about everything it has in its armory into Ukraine, sort of building it up as a kind of an armed aircraft carrier targeting Russia, and they say, "Well, we didn't know that you would do this." And say, "Yeah, we were led by the nose." And again, I mean, it's very funny. We talk about this. We were led by the nose. It's a strange thing for any leader to say this. It's to say we were led by the nose. And then you think, what kind of a leader says we were led by the nose? I'm sure a leader, you're supposed to avoid being led by the nose. You're supposed to know that your adversaries are trying to get the better of you, and they dip their hands into your pocket and they're trying to cheat you and lie to you and do everything possible to weaken you and destroy you. And therefore, to think, well, I went into trusting them and we were led by the nose. Well, why do you trust them? Why would you trust Merkel? Why would you trust Obama? Why would you trust Radek Sikorsky? Why would you trust any of these people? And yet that's the strange argument that Putin presents. Well, we somehow trusted them and they betrayed our trust. And it's a very strange way of presenting yourself as a leader. And that's why I was thinking about Khrushchev. This is in May 1960. Saying, well, that was a different era of Russian leaders. They didn't say we trusted anybody. We don't trust anyone. That's right. You pick the cat up by the tail and you bash his head against the ground. Anyway, Vic Shakapopoulos says, Trump administration is doing what seems to be the escape forward trick to save the U.S. global influence. It's like in the famous quote from the leopard, if we want things to stay the same, things will have to change. Yes, that's the line. That's the line from the leopard. That's probably right. But Trump again, he wants to sort of to be America the dominant power, but because he's so transactional, that he doesn't really stick with things, and that's why there's a lot of activity, a lot of frenetic activity, but because there's so much of it, you always feel that, well, he's going to change his mind in 3 days' time and decide to back down from what he had planned. So there's always some big thing. Oh, this is the latest thing from Trump and the latest. But then he backs down when he realizes that, hey, well, he's coming up with resistance. So there's no point in pursuing it. That's what I was saying earlier on the issue of tariffs, because either you're going to use tariffs, as the kind of a long-term solution to America's economic problems. You use the defensive mechanism of tariffs in order to protect your domestic industries, which is what the United States used to do, or you use tariffs in order to threaten and bully and coerce other countries. But that means it's just a short-term thing. Okay, we'll threaten tariffs. Okay, well, let's forget about the tariffs, and we've come to an agreement. So they're two quite different notions. And then, but so Trump doesn't seem to have figured out what he really wants to do, what exactly he's trying to do with the tariffs. And then, but Vic, thanks for reminding us about the leopard. So yeah, that's a I don't know whether we want to feature that on the Gaggle, because I always found this a excruciatingly boring film. And I don't know. I mean, I know people love it, and it's about 4 hours long, but found it really boring. But maybe. So anyway, Danaki says, so Trump's big idea of an American sovereign wealth fund is buying 2 billion clot shots from Pfizer and Moderna to shove down someone's throat. Yeah, I guess so. I guess he wants to buy into TikTok. That he's going to use it to own TikTok. I don't know how you can quite do that. I don't know if a government can exactly own a social media company. I mean, it just seems very strange. If it's social media, it's like the government owning a newspaper. I mean, I don't quite know how you can do it. I mean, a government can encourage investors to invest in TikTok, but I don't know how the United States can just use the sovereign wealth fund and to own TikTok. I mean, I don't know how that can work. Anne Marie says, sorry, I haven't had time yet. We'll listen to Nielsen. Good, thank you. I look forward to reading your comments. And Anne Marie says, says Marco Rubio talking about the future of multipolarity. How does that go together with America First? All these tariffs, and talks about Panama Canal, Greenland, all these new military bases in Europe, and also his huge one in Lebanon. I don't buy it. I kind of agree with you. I think he does this. He sounds a good game when he's talking to Megyn Kelly. Oh, yeah, that's multipolarity. We have to respect other countries, and we don't own the world. We have to accept that the other countries have their own interests and there are other great powers. The unipolar moment is gone. All perfectly reasonable, excellent points. But as I said earlier, and things that his predecessors had also said, this is what they always do when they come into power, and they said, now we promise to turn over a leaf. We're not going to be throwing our weight around anymore. We're not going to be bullying anyone anymore. We promise we're going to listen to others. And it doesn't last for very long. And as you point out, Anne Marie, it didn't last very long with Rubio. He went ahead and told Panama, "Hey, you got to get with the program. You heard what Trump told you. Get the Chinese out. Oh, and even if you don't get the Chinese out, we're probably going to take the canal anyway. I mean, we just want it." So you're right. I think this good. Turning over a new leaf, that it didn't last for very long. The good neighbor policy didn't last for very long. I mean, even shorter than the Obama policy in 2009. So, and again, as you said, Greenland and everything. So none of that shows a great deal of consideration, respect for others' interests. So anyway, thank you, Anne Marie. And Vic says, Vic Shakapopoulos says, I can't think of a single good utopia film. Good utopia film. No, I think that's a difficult one. Well, I was thinking of a film from the 1930s, Lost Horizon, which I haven't seen in a long time. That's a utopia film. Um, the uh, dystopia films are, I think, more likely. I think there have been a number of dystopia films. Um, Metropolis, again, Fritz Lang's movie. So, I mean, that's why I was thinking utopia and dystopia. But I always also have difficulties thinking of many utopia films. There were a number of films made during the the era of the Grand Alliance between United States and the Soviet Union during World War II, and there were a number of these propaganda films extolling the glories of the Soviet Union made during those years. There was God, what was there was one made about a collective farm. I think it was called Dear Comrade. No, God, it's on the tip of my tongue. But it was one of the glories of a collective farm, and the principle of is, and somebody says there, share and share alike. That's our principle. So that was not Dear Comrade, North Star. Maybe that was in North Star. It was the one about the collective farm. But there were a number of those kinds of, so that was a kind of a film about utopia. So that's of historic interest. I don't know if anyone would particularly want to see it, but maybe I have to give it a thought whether any good utopia films. Dystopia, no shortage of dystopia films. Denaki says Brazil for dystopia. That's a very good idea. Excellent, exactly. Brazil. That's a good film as well. Yeah, but Brazil is a very good one for dystopia. So anyone, in fact, maybe if we can skip the the utopia, just go for films featuring dystopia. Um, so, um, and then uh, if the subs issue is solvable, yeah, we've now solved it thanks to Vic. Shakapopoulos, thanks to him, we've solved the subtitles issue. I propose the Tarkovsky universe of films. Okay, Tarkovsky. What films of Tarkovsky's would you um, suggest? That would be interesting. The Sacrifice or Solaris, but again, suggest what Tarkovsky films you would think of. Um, Vic says films about political transformation of society. I could recommend some gems from Eastern Europe. Okay, if you can recommend them, absolutely. I'd love to hear suggestions. And then Vic says The Leopard is a novel adaptation. Maybe you would enjoy the book more. I didn't. Plus, the film wasn't that boring. Only the last hour or so more. Well, I think it's a matter of taste. I mean, because I know for many people that they love The Leopard. Absolutely, they swear by The Leopard. And I think I was the only person who actually thought that was kind of boring. But I thought the novel was not that exciting, to be honest. I didn't think it was particularly thrilling. And again, it wasn't a particularly long novel. I mean, it's not like, well, it's Anna Karenina, so you need a 4 hour, maybe 6 hour, 8 hours on Anna Karenina or whatever. The Leopard was actually quite a short novel, so I don't quite know how it justified 4 hours. And then Vic says, technically not exactly dystopia, but I really enjoyed Strange Days. All right, Strange Days. Let me write that down, okay? Strange Days, 1995. Okay, that's it. That's a thought. And the Nugget Stalker, that's apropos of Tarkovsky, okay? Robert says things to come. Yeah, that's things to come. That's the H.G. Wells things to come. Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, I saw that years ago with things to come with Raymond Massey. Raymond Massey. Yeah, yeah. That's a good suggestion. Um, and or a great Russian films category. Okay, Russian films. Okay, well that's an interesting. We said great Russian films. I think that's also I think a good subject for a theme. Great Russian films, and then you can feel choose a couple of Tarkovsky films. But great Russian films is a very good. We have to have a poll on that. So yeah, let's do utopia and dystopia as the first poll, and then we'll do the great Russian films for the next poll. Um, yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. Um, and Okay, that sounds good. Um, and um, and then Vic says the Yugoslav Rain 1999, Polish Sign 1992, Russian Brat 1997. I think of those I've seen Brat, and I didn't really like that very much, to be honest. It's not my thing. Um, but I'd be kind of interested if you're thinking about East European films, Vic. Maybe East European films of an earlier era of the which I think is quite interesting. I mean, we all this, we've had the ones in the 90s and so on, but of the earlier era, the communist era, because they made some very interesting films in Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia in particular, but Poland. Um, there were a number of major Polish filmmakers which were very interesting. And then Danaka says Kusturica, baby, yeah, Kusturica is good. Um, but I mean, and again, we did feature I think Knife in the Water at some point, but there are other major Polish filmmakers which were quite interesting, and Czechoslovak films Czechoslovak filmmakers. Would be quite, be interesting to feature them. I'm not sure on what theme as yet, but it's something worth looking at. These are older films. This is in the communist times, and it's, again, very interesting that they were making such really good films particularly in the communist era. I mean, there's obviously closely observed trains that they made in Czechoslovakia, um, and Vic says, I wrote the titles in Slavic languages. English titles will be The Wounds, Pig's Brother. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's the one I think I've seen that one. Oh, The Brother, which again, it's not my thing. I didn't particularly like it. Um, and I think our time is getting by. We've spent quite a long time here. So thank you, everybody who joined me. Thank you very much for all of your comments, criticism. You didn't have too much criticism, thankfully. Not today, anyway. But thank you um, above all, for the contributions, just to keep those hounds at bay, because tomorrow, when they get up, they look at the tip jar, and then all hell breaks loose. I mean, it's always a very difficult dealing with them. So anyway, thank you so much, and we will be back on Thursday, same time, and look forward to talking to you then. All the best. Good night. See you Thursday. Bye bye.